What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the GroovyFiles. I'm your boy Grant, and with me I got Donovan.
Yo,
In today's episode, we're gonna be talking about relevance in hip hop. The reason why I'm gonna create this episode was because of 21 Savage and Nas over the week. That little discourse on if he's relevant or not and everything like that. It had made me think, what do we define relevance as? I think I think there's multiple definitions of relevant. Um, Not even just multiple definitions. I think more so that we tend to put a um, more surface level view on relevance in hip hop itself. Um, like if it's only just being trending or anything like that. Like people don't take into account like how well you stream, how like your sales over a certain period of time, um, how just longevity in general, um, like for instance, and also your impact on the music scene as a whole. Donovan, what would you define relevance as?
for me, I think what people view relevance as normally is like just being able to like stay in the forefront of people's mind all the time. But I really only think there are a handful, at most like 5 to 7 people who are pretty much at the forefront of people's mind at all times. And that more so has to do with less music stuff and more like the persona that they conveyed, like with Future and the toxicity stuff. And it's like, of course, like Future's a legendary artist, but you know, the persona has carried him more because of the stuff with, you know, Lori Harvey and Russell Wilson, and then of course Drake with all the theatrics that he does, and I think they're always going to be relevant, but it's less about the music stuff. For me, I think you are relevant if you can announce you're dropping something or you can announce you're doing something and people are going to be or a decent amount of people are going to be excited for it. So for Nas, I feel like it's kind of at this point, because he solidified himself so much, it's impossible for him not to be relevant. Like just because your specific social circle or even like location, like even the South, isn't particularly excited for it, doesn't mean he's not relevant, because it's enough people that are like, oh my God, Nas is about to drop.
I get what you're saying. Like for instance, um, I know if like, and that's what really kind of threw me off about the 21 point. It's kind of like he was like, oh, he's not relevant. He just has a good fan base. Would that not make you relevant? Like, I just kind of thinking about that. If you have a fan base that's big enough to where you're still being able to put in a mainstream, like, would that not count?
And for me, on top of that, I feel like set that point that 21 was trying to make is the same knock that people from the North were trying to put on the South at one point. Because it's like the South had a lot of these local legends who weren't big in the mainstream because Southern rap wasn't allowed to be that popular at the time, or people did not want to give them that credit. And so you have a lot of these Southern rap legends who your average up north person or someone who may not be that into rap that can say, oh, they're not that relevant, or they were never that big or whatever. But they set us to like a culture in that area, or they set the tone, or like change the game in that area. So it's an unfair criticism.
Like, I agree. Like, it's just kind of it minimizes what relevance is because if we all just gauge relevance on who's trending on social media, that's not necessarily easy, like a hard benchmark to make. Like, especially because you can stir up some like a wild point or like a wild take and be relevant. Like that makes you like you can be quote unquote relevant. but I think we have a too much surface level view on what relevance is in hip hop itself, and it just kind of it waters down the art form. It's one of those things where narratives kind of the sport of hip hop is too narrative driven right now. And I think that's what the biggest problem amongst fans is. Like, you shouldn't be describing art as just overrated, mid. Like, you can give your opinions on art in concrete ways that aren't just super narrative driven. And that's why I think, and like, let's be honest, when people are talking about relevance or somebody's saying somebody is irrelevant, a lot of the times that has a negative connotation to it. Like, that's not uncommon. People, every time I'm seeing that word used or somebody says somebody is irrelevant, a lot of times they mean it in a negative way.
Oh yeah, it's really irrelevancy, or the term irrelevancy is only going to be used as a knock. And again, it's just not a fair criticism of somebody, because most of the time, if they're big enough to even be considered, or for people to even attempt to knock them as irrelevant, then somebody is listening to them or enjoying them or doing something. Like, it wouldn't, just because I feel like a lot of people want to consider like people that aren't like played on the radio irrelevant as well. And again, that's just not what the standard is for a lot of these things now. And with the rap being so much more open because of the internet, a lot of people can thrive without mainstream things. So it really doesn't even matter if it doesn't matter if you have mainstream appeal or not, because if you get a core fan base, then they're gonna make sure you thrive in whatever space you are in. Um, so like people like, Smino, Saba, No Name, those type of people, like, they're always going to be relevant, because as soon as they announce, hey, I'm about to drop, they're gonna sell out merch, they're gonna sell out shows, they're gonna do whatever, even if they may never be nominated for a Grammy or never nominated for any type of big award. Like, Doechii is always gonna be relevant, Rico is always gonna be relevant. Like, these people have a space somewhere.
Like, yeah, like it really just all depends on how good at your job you are. I think that's part of it. Like, or just how good your core fan base is, like, or your core demographic is. Like, we can easily say if somebody's core demographic falls off, that it will become irrelevant. Like, or like they just turn off by the music. It's like, oh, you're irrelevant now. Like, people care more about labels than the actual music itself and the actual content itself. That's where the issue lies. Like, there's no reason why this isn't even like just on 21. I like his music myself, but more so that there's just, what's the end goal here? Like, we're not really getting anything out of, like, it's just super surface level analysis, and and just less actual talk about the content over hip hop in general. Like, it shouldn't be this thing where we have to debate labels every other day or anything like that. Like, it really doesn't make sense. And it's just it's a surface level view of what relevance is. Like, I can say my sound relevant for years on end. Like, that's something that actually has like backing to it, and be like, okay, you can actually back that up or something like that. Or my impact in rap game has actual relevance. Like, you can actually back it up, and that itself would make you relevant. Like, it's just such a surface level. Like, people tend to give too many labels surface level meaning. And like, for instance, like what people do with classic albums, and be like, oh, this album is a classic. Why is it a classic? Give me like one watered down reason why it's a classic, instead of actual like list of actual impact or list of the accolades that came with said album. Like it just kind
I
of.
think, and I think that's also another point of it, especially with like classic albums. I don't think people give things enough time to be considered a classic or not. Like I feel like people want to consider something a classic album like a month into it being out because of how much they like it. And I understand people have different definitions of things, but also at the same time, like where I think that's a consequence of internet culture and people wanting to be the first to label something or do something and being at the forefront of something. Like people aren't digesting things the way they weren't, the way they once were. Like people rate albums 20 minutes into them being out, and the album is 40 minutes long, which I've always felt like was an issue. Like when I think Mr. Morale came out or something, and people were saying whether they liked it or not. It was a Mr. Morale was like an hour 4 minute album, and at like 12:40, people were like, oh, I really like this, or I really don't. And it's like, it is what it is, but there's not really a way that you could have digested that album that fast.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I really think it varies on the artist. I think it really does. Like for instance, there's absolutely no way you can listen to a Kendrick album and tell me, oh, you completely dissected this, and like you dissected this in like one listen. Like you can't tell me that. But there's others that are kind of like, okay, you can stay. I feel like this. You can't give your full. I agree on this. You can't really give your full blown thoughts. Like you can give like a more of a surface level opinion, talking about like, yeah, this isn't really like tickling my fancy to first listen. I feel like that's fine. I feel like saying, oh yeah, this is a horrible album, or this is a like I feel like the in-depth analysis you can't really make until a little bit of time has passed. Like maybe like with like a couple of listens, I guess. I don't think it's the time frame doesn't necessarily bother me. It's more so the fact that okay, how many times you listen to it? Like you need to give it more than one chance. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's also an important thing. Is how many times did you really, especially if you know, like certain things, like when people drop like mixtape or just like a random collection of songs, I'm not really like mad at people being like, oh, I really like, just giving their opinion on it, whatever. Because a lot of times people will drop things and they don't really need anything else besides just a collection of songs, and that's perfectly fine. But yeah, for people that are trying to make a digestible, cohesive album, and for you to try to like act like you know all what this is about off the first listen, I think that's irresponsible.
But that is all I have. Appreciate you guys for tuning in for this next episode. I'm gonna try to get more content out quicker on a more weekly basis. In the meantime, subscribe to the YouTube, subscribe to the check out my Twitter, check out my Instagram, just launched that, and check out my WordPress. But other than that, we out.